Welcome, everyone, to another episode of LifeSpark Live, The Complete Shift, where we take the time to have national conversations about senior health that no one is having. Together, let's get to the heart of the matter, to an ever-growing aging market, revealing the opportunity, mindset, and solutions for a much-needed complete shift in senior health. I'm Joel Theisen, a nurse, CEO, and the host of LifeSpark Live. I'm so excited to talk data, depth, and humanity with all of you. Let's get the conversation going. I have a real special guest, Mr. Bob Kramer. To give you a little background on Bob, he's a LifeSpark advisor. He's a founder and fellow at Nexus Insights and co-founder of Strategic Advisors. He's an expert, really, in providing insights and models for next generation of aging and aging services. He's obviously published. He's on a lot of national syndicated shows, and he's the guy people go to when they're really stumped about what's really going on out there in the world. Great to have you, and excited to get this thing rolling.
I'm delighted to be joining you today, Joel. I know we're going to have fun. Our conversations are always good, and boy, golly, now we're going to be taped for our actual show. That makes it even more fun.
That's right.
This is terrific.
Today, what we're going to really focus on is, really the next gen of senior housing. You talk about that. You've talked about that your whole career, but not just the incremental refinements and adaptions. My hope for today is to really push us and share with the viewers and listeners the real fact of we need a bigger change than these small adaptations. We need to really listen and really focus on that consumer-centric side. And why does this matter to you, this topic?
I first got introduced to this whole area when I was in the state legislature in Maryland in the early and mid 1980s. And at that time, it was clear to me that as a country, we were completely unprepared for what was coming in terms of the aging of society. But, I would say to your comment about kind of what we don't need is incrementalism, especially since the things that you and I and others have been saying for more than 30 years, we're still saying, and we haven't seen a whole hell of a lot of movement, quite frankly. So I would say there are three fundamental areas where we've really got to turn things on their heads. One is in the whole concept of aging and combating ageism. Others have said ageism is prejudice against our future selves. What's made it urgent now is that future is now here for many, including myself as a leading edge boomer. Okay.
That's right.
So what does that mean? Well, that put simply, and then I'll go into the other two areas.
Sure.
It means changing the expectations for aging and growing older in society, because only when you change those expectations will you then change the lived experience. And that's ultimately the goal.
Yeah.
Then the second area that we have to change is housing. Housing for the elderly has become a segregate them and put them in a ward, and basically further learned helplessness and dependency. And the housing model is framed around deficits and loss. It's not framed around life, around life spark. It's not framed on the positives of engagement and purpose. And then the third area we have to turn on its head is healthcare. We have a healthcare system. First of all, it's not really a system, but it's focused on acute care intervention. And really, it's a sick care model. And it's a sick care model that focuses on being reactive, being curative, and ultimately being passive in terms of the consumer, the individual. And we are making some progress in that, but we have to change that to a well-care model that's predictive, preventive, and participatory in terms of the individual. So healthcare, housing, aging. Three big topics, three things that really we have to radically change if we're going to do the things that need to be done, and that increasingly I think older individuals and their adult children in our society are going to demand.
Yeah, that's awesome. When you talked about, what we've done, we let the private sector in, that was great, right? People got really excited about real estate, a lot of money pouring into this opportunity to house people. And then we basically really just isolated them. And the way I think about that sometimes is we did that with our mental health population back in the 30s and 40s, right? We had, lovely acres, and, obviously we're just housing all these folks, and that didn't turn out so good, right? And so I fear a little bit, like, we've isolated the most important generation, the most wise population, and we've put them into a lot of these places where, to your point, it's very isolative. And so, I mean, do you see a parallel there? And do you see, how do you get out of that?
There's somewhat of a parallel. There's some differences. One thing is, I think what senior housing has done well is having eyes on the residents who live there 24/7. And that's a real plus. Secondly, human nature and the human spirit being what it is, in a lot of those situations, people form bonds and they form community.
Right.
And that's really a huge positive. They have a sense of connection. That said, we've also, because much of the model is framed around deficits and loss, it's a declinist view of aging. And what we do is, in the desire to meet the consumer, we actually further a sense of dependency and helplessness rather than engagement and purpose. And so, and with that is a segregated from rather than integrated with. And I think as we talk about next gen and boomers, they don't want to be seen as the problem. They want to be seen as part of the solution. And I think that's something that really excites me.
I love that. And we obviously totally agree. All that stuff is the right thing to do, right? Not isolate, involve people, build community, work not from the whole deficit and loss, but really from a strength, right? And an opportunity, and open up hope doors for these people and really live the fullest possible life all the way to the very last minute, right? But what's getting in the way? Why isn't that happening? What's the root cause of these issues where there isn't this big shift that you're talking about?
Well, one is, again, we have a healthcare model that is interested always in asking what's wrong with you today, rather than saying, what are your life goals? Everyone has goals. Everyone has things they want to see or do or accomplish. So again, a healthcare system that focuses on sick care and doesn't really focus at all on purpose. And I know that LifeSpark is ultimately about helping you discover or rediscover that sense of what gives you a sense of purpose and belonging.
Right.
And let me illustrate this by one of my, I've visited hundreds, probably thousands of communities, senior living communities, over the last almost 40 years now. And one of the things that most upsets me is when I'm touring a community, say with the executive director, and a resident comes up, and I've had this happen many times, and the executive director says, this is Mr. Jones, or this is Mr. Smith. She used to be this, or
Sure.
he used to do this.
Yeah.
And so I immediately then engage the resident and say, tell me, what are you excited about what you're doing here today?
Right.
And we get into a discussion. And then afterwards, I say to the ED, do you realize how you marginalize that person? Because you introduced them in the past tense to me.
Yeah.
And so we got to change that.
So,
and, but is it worth doing? I believe our economy, our workforce, our social fabric, our communities need older adults as an integral part of that fabric. But if we just see them as a burden, as a bunch of people that have nothing left to offer, but we have some sort of moral obligation to take care of them, quite frankly, Joel, the willpower won't be there.
What I'm hearing from you is part of it's our mindset, right? To humanistically kind of degrade, if you will, that. I mean, naturally. But the other thing, Bob, that I wanted to ask you about, which I think is interesting, is what does money have to do with it? Obviously we came a long way, right? In the old days, skilled nursing facilities, the pea-smelling halls and the drooling people in wheelchairs, right? That was the big thing. And we were going to get rid of that. And now we have this. We have really nice buildings, and there's community and activities, but yet it's still not really sparking the heck out of these folks. So what does money have to do with it, or financing or investment in some of those things to create that? Or is it purely an ageist mindset of a younger generation that doesn't get it?
Well, it's a bit of both. It's not an either or. Right now, we have a lot of options. I'm not saying they're all great, but there are a lot of options for people that have money. And then for people who qualify as low income,
Mm-hmm.
they have options. Now, are there long wait lists? Absolutely. But there are options in terms of government subsidies, whether it's long-term care, Medicaid, or Medicare waivers, whether it's housing subsidies. They're inadequate, but there are options. Then we have a huge group in the middle, which is only growing larger. And for them, they can't afford the private pay options, at least for very long. But they're told, well, you got to spend down to poverty to qualify for Medicaid or for housing subsidies. In my work in this field is really to first draw attention and then develop scalable solutions to serve this middle market.
Yep.
And part of it is really this integration of housing and healthcare and community, these three pieces to then produce health. Health is not just simply having healthcare. It's much more than that we know. And right now, we have these silos. So there are funding and silos for housing. And for senior housing, a lot of that's private sector dollars. Then we have healthcare, and most of that for older adults, one way or another, is public dollars. But those two systems of housing and healthcare might be two different planets. There are differing incentives, differing criteria, differing restrictions. And then you add social determinants of health, food, transportation, so forth. So again, and you know this at LifeSpark, it is hard work to try and align these different things. But to me, that alignment between housing, healthcare, and that sense of community, belonging, and purpose, when you get those three together, then you've got what I would actually call an aspirational model rather than an avoidance model.
Right.
Cookie cutter, plain vanilla assisted living, it serves a purpose, but it's not aspirational. Let's be honest.
Right.
Most people, most boomers want to do everything they can lifestyle wise to avoid being put into assisted living. Right. Because of what it connotes.
Right. Even that put word, right? Instead of being,
I use like the word deliberate.
I know exactly. I just wanted to point it out.
It's a loss of agency. And so the sense for boomers, senior living is their parents' notion of retirement and aging, and it's not what they want. They want something that's going to put more life in their years, not just add years to their life. We have to do it in a way that's predictive and preventative and participatory, that enables people to be more involved in taking charge of their health. And that means then we've got to create incentive for folks who are going to hold that healthcare dollar risk to then incentivize prevention and incentivize wellness rather than our old system, which is a volume system. I mean, senior living, let's be honest, was irrelevant to the healthcare system except as a producer of high volume patients.
Sure, and it's still mostly is today, right? I mean, there's a few.
We're still overwhelmingly in a fee-for-service system that's based on volume. The reason that I joined LifeSpark as an external advisor was you were doing the hard work, and it is hard, of figuring out how do we focus on prevention and wellness and, putting a spark in people's lives, and at the same time, take the risk, get paid for it. And to me, that's the future of where we're going to go. Just having housing or just having access to healthcare does not produce health. And so the issues we have to look at is what really produces health. And to me, that's that intersection, that Venn diagram between what I call it housing, healthcare, and community. Community means something that gives you a sense of purpose, belonging, and quite frankly, gives you hope for what you look forward to in the next day.
That's right.
And like your LifeSpark Challenge series and games and so forth that you've done. To some people, they might say, oh, this is hokey and trite. The reality is, no, what we've seen is that people suddenly realize they're capable of things they no longer thought they were capable of.
That's
And
right.
you know what that does? It gives them hope.
That's
It
right.
gets them really excited.
Yep.
And to me, that that gets me excited. And because that's where we need to be going.
We obviously have a lot of similar thinking around, we call it both sides of the wallet, using government dollars as well as out-of-pocket dollars, and really blending that to create this ecosystem, this Venn diagram that you're talking about, because by itself, it's very difficult to incorporate that kind of investment in that longitudinal, holistic approach. Definitely there's effort, but people are still feeling that they're not feeling that. They're still feeling siloed. Their hope doors, I call it hope doors, Bob, are not opening up, right? We're not really opening up the new. I'm worried that the market will just really process more people and house more people. How do we press and be relevant to the owners, operators that some of them have been doing this their whole careers? And again, it's all good work, right? I'm not judging the effort and work, but there's got to be this shift. It's not incrementalism, right? It's not a dial of tuning. It's like we got to really take a shot at this. And so what would you say to those people that are like, yeah, Bob, we've been talking about this. We do this with our lovely living blah, blah, blah model, and it's great, and we got this. I mean, what do you say to that?
Well, what I would say is people, particularly the next generation consumer, the Boom X customer, will do everything humanly possible to avoid your setting in the future. Why? Because they want to thrive, not just survive. You're offering a survival setting. They want a thrive setting. Mm-hmm. So they want to know how you're going to make them thrive. And I think that change, I like to say that the greatest generation that really drove the growth and the type of product over the last 30 years, they had what I call accidental longevity. They never expected to live as long as they did, and they were just grateful to survive. Their children, who had to put them into senior living or assisted living, they want to thrive, and they want to know what you're going to do to enable them to thrive. Let's use a simple example. Activities directors. That connotes to most people bingo or some type of game, or maybe it's a cooking class or whatever. As one of my Nick Talk speakers said provocatively years ago, she said, I challenge you to reposition your activities directors, and instead they should be purpose matchmakers, where their job is to match residents with whatever gives them that sense of purpose. My wife and I love to joke that we have all the aches, pains, and inconveniences that go with our advanced maturity and experience. So
That's right. That's right.
Let's not, there are things physically that can be a real drag. That said, it doesn't mean that you cannot have and enjoy a sense of growth, learning, purpose, connection. And so purpose matchmakers, meaning makers, whatever you want to call it, if fundamentally our communities are seen as places to help people rediscover or connect with what gives them a sense of purpose and belonging, they suddenly become aspirational.
Right.
But you know what? They also suddenly produce healthier longevity. Becca Levy, Yale social psychologist, has written a great book called Breaking the Age Code, how your beliefs about aging determine how long and well you live. And her research, others have done it, she's the foremost in the field, has shown that it takes basically 7.5 years off your life if you buy into a defeatist, basically declinist view of aging. I often say in senior housing today, we ask important questions, Joel, but we usually don't ask identity questions.
Right.
We ask care questions. We ask finance questions. What kinds of assistance do you need with activities of daily living? Or what's your ability to pay? Or what medications do you? No one wants their identity wrapped up in the answers to those questions.
At LifeSpark, we use life planning, right? We use discovery. We don't assess people, right? We discover and we ask those questions around purpose, passion. What gets you up in the morning? What keeps you up at night? What are your really things that you aspire to do in your life, right? I just wanted to share with the listeners that for LifeSpark, our occupancy rates for our mature, we have 40 buildings that we operate, and they're over 95%. I say that because the reason for that is 2 years of commitment of where people are seeing this as a true alternative, Bob. And it's not about LifeSpark commercial, right? I'm just saying it works, like to your point, and I want to aspire more to really make those investments in their mentation and their culture, right? To your point about asking the right questions, focus on the right stuff, focus on hope, focus on not defeatism, but obviously opportunism, right? And those types of things, because when you do it well, it shows up. It shows up everywhere, right? And the other thing that we haven't talked about, and I'll ask you this, from the standpoint of all the things you've seen, when you work in those types of models versus the models you're thinking and aspiring to promote, what does that do for the culture of the staff and the worker that's so been decimated over the last 5 to 10 years?
It gives them hope that what they're doing each day, they sense a sense of purpose. In other words, just think about it. We talked about those kind of those usual questions that are asked upon intake or assessment.
Right.
You contrast that to, gee, Mr. Smith, tell me, what are your goals for moving in here? What do you hope to accomplish in the next year? What is it you're looking to learn? Tell me, what gifts, talents, experiences would you like to contribute to this community? That sounds really basic. I would argue that is a huge shift.
Agreed.
From a view that we're here to take care of you. We need to know where you've lost it so that we can take care of you for those things that you're not capable of doing for yourself. And so that what we're doing, if you have a culture that seeks to empower the residents, you're going to empower the staff.
That's right.
If you have a culture of hopelessness and helplessness, that's a depressing place to work as staff.
It's next gen serving, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not just carrying and wiping butts and doing, kind of the tasky stuff and making sure people are safe, right? That's a table stakes. But I'm next gen serving because I'm serving their souls, which is serving my soul, which then in turn translates into economics, right? As we both know, because when people want to be there, when our staff wants to work there, obviously you win in the economic side and you grow opportunity to invest more in this beautiful thing.
Well, as a person that's been known a lot for data and metrics throughout my work in the whole senior housing and care field, what are we talking about? Well, for assisted living, normally about 2/3 of the budget is staff.
Right.
When you take turnover rates that at times are well north of 50% and sometimes up to more like 100%.
Absolutely.
And that means that is the cost of hiring, the cost of training. And when those people walk out the door, not to mention what that means for the people, the residents, and who formed relationships and then lose that relationship. So staffing costs, but then a second thing is retention of staff then leads to also, I would argue, retention of residents. And retention of residents, what does that mean? Longer stay.
Right.
Longer stay means less pressure on your marketing team to constantly fill empty units. And longer stay really translates to also people that live longer in a community tend to become champions of that community.
That's right.
They become champions of it to anyone who will listen. And what that does is that's your marketing team.
It's just human nature, right, Bob? So listen, this is great. What would you say, Bob, for the final question here? What do you think housing for older adults will really look like in 2050? I'm going to put your kind of prognosticator hat on. What do you think it's really going to look like?
Well, several things. First of all, it'll be places where things are done by and with older adults rather than for and to older adults. That'll be the culture.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be called senior housing or senior living, as I said. That'll be an absolute anachronism. I think we're going to see less and less age segregation, right down to, I think many of the communities won't necessarily be technically even age segregated. I think many of the residents will still be working. I think you will see a volunteer pay it forward model where residents are doing many of the jobs in the community as a way to also lessen the costs but also create community. The gig economy, one of the biggest areas of the gig economy in the future, will be where there are groups of older adults gathered between the ages of 75 and 100. And there will be classes in entrepreneurship, and there will be new businesses being started and being launched. And there will be multi-generational programs where you're going to have folks 22 working with folks 82, and each bringing things to and together to do a startup, where the 22-year-old suddenly seeing, gosh, the longevity economy is a huge opportunity, but gee, I don't really know anything about older adults.
Right.
And so what I look forward to seeing, you're already starting to see this through programs at places like Stanford, but I think you're going to see it around the country. You're going to see laboratories of innovation of 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 80-year-olds. And those are going to be places where I want to live.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, that's a great place, Bob. You know what? I just want to thank you for today. I mean, obviously, I want to thank you for today, but I want to thank you more for your years and years of wisdom that you've been passing out across the country and across the world for everybody, right? This is about making the shift, not talking about the shift. So please, everyone out there, listen to what Bob had to say today. Take a few of those nuggets and get going, because the consumers need us, your staff needs us, and obviously our humanity needs us. So with that, thanks, and thanks again, Bob.
Thank you, Joel. Enjoyed it, and I love our common passion. And together, and working with others like-minded, I'm very optimistic about what we'll accomplish.